Hey everyone, my name is Tim Noyes. I'm bringing you out to my awesome garden. It is a tomato breeding ground right now. This is very amateur, but it may look professional, but as we move further down to other tomatoes, you may think a little bit differently. This right here is currently breeding projects that I'm doing with Craig LaHoulier and other people in the Dwarf Tomato Project. The interesting thing about it is that I'm not looking for anything here besides specifically things that they want. Last time I went ahead and I did a whole bunch of searching through some of the seeds that Craig gave me, and I found some really interesting ones that I'm growing along with these. But sometimes when you're working with other breeders, you know, they can't do it all by themselves, so they need your help. And so, you know, it doesn't require much. You know, they usually ask for, you know, they say however many plants you can grow out. The more they can grow out in different places, the better. And then they ask you to send back seed. So I wanted to show you a few more things before I actually got over to my tomato breeding project that I've been working on, and just show you some couple interesting recessive traits. For example, here you've got some fuzzy leaves. It's a little bit hard to tell because of the recent rain, but you can almost see this is what the whole entire top of the plant looks like. It almost looks like there's ice on the top of it. It's really interesting. The thought was that it kept bugs away. I'm not 100% sure that's the thing that it does, but it's really cool to have some different types of traits to be able to include on other tomatoes. This one over here is a variegated tomato. What's really interesting is how extreme some of the leaves go, and they're all different. So like, for example, on this one, there's not a lot of variegation, but if you look at something like this, it almost looks as if someone had painted it. You know, the interesting thing about it is that on some of the other variegated tomatoes I had, it didn't really set a lot of fruit. This one sets a good amount of fruit, and it just wasn't as flavorful as I wanted, but I wanted to keep the gene kind of going and maybe do a little bit of searching within the seed that I saved from last year. And if you even look in the back, there's one that has what they call yellow foliage. It is one of Gary Cass's tomatoes, Menahune, but I just like to have those different types of colors within the garden, and this is the first year that I'm growing this out. So I do a little bit of trialing too, along with actually some dwarf tomatoes, some potato leaf dwarf tomatoes. So I've got a little bit of everything. I just like to grow a bunch of different varieties as part of a trial to see whether or not, hey, if they've got something really good or some good flavor, that might be something interesting to either pass on to someone else, or I can go ahead and breed them into my other stuff. So come on, let's go check out some of these tomatoes. Watch out for the beautyberry. It's kind of a, if you actually look up and around, it's quite protected from the sun over here. And I think that it helps with my tomato growing because they're just not getting beat down always. But it also kind of hinders, it doesn't produce nearly as many tomatoes as it probably would have if it was in full sun. But it makes it a lot easier because if I have them in containers like I do, they require a lot more watering than whether they were in the ground. So here's an interesting thing. This is my Hawaiian Punch tomato. All these are my Hawaiian Punch tomatoes, and I've got a whole line down over here. What's really what I was going for was I took these really great tomatoes. It was a Gary Cass tomato called Woolly Kate and a new big dwarf tomato that was, you know, obviously a dwarf tomato, and they just look so completely different. So one was a large beefsteak type tomato, one was a smaller plum that was yellow and with that anthocyan and that purple blush basically on the top of it. And it was so interesting, and I said, oh, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put those together, and I'm just gonna see what I'm gonna get, because they both had great flavor. Well, the first year I did it, I got a hybrid that had no flavor whatsoever, and I was basically scared that I basically screwed everything up. But the following year, I went ahead and I grew out probably, I think 10 plants, and out of those 10 plants, one of them had really awesome flavor, and that's what I decided to name that one Hawaiian Punch. And so these are the seeds that came from Hawaiian Punch. So something that's interesting is that you can see here is if you look at each individual plant, it's got variation of amount of that woolly or that hairy gene in it. So this one right here has basically no hair on it whatsoever, or what I would say very similar to a regular tomato. the one next to it is one that looks like very much like its mother, in the sense of the hair, the cupped leaves, so it's really got that beautiful look to it, almost gray when it's not wet. And then the one next to it is like somewhere in between. It's interesting that you would think that some of these traits would either show up or not show up, but there is this kind of melding, you know, to some of these traits, where it's not as simple as whether it's going to be apparent or present or not present. So what also was interesting that I found so far this year is the two tomatoes that this one here, which was I call it semi-hairy, and this one here, which is not hairy, they both have tomatoes already set on them. Whereas this one, which is what the tomato originally looked like, has no tomatoes set on it yet. It's producing tons of flowers, but it's not actually producing fruit yet. So it's one of those things that you want to remember, that you know, as you're writing down in a journal, that this one might be a later season. It may just require a different set of temperatures to actually set the fruit. I don't think that it's, I should say it this way, I do believe it's going to set fruit, but I don't know when. These ones have already set fruit, and they look like nothing like the one that I saved. The one I saved was a plum type tomato, yellow with purple blush. These ones almost look like a beefsteak tomato, very flat and lobed. So it's very interesting to see what colors they're going to be and what shapes they're going to be. But if we actually go through some of the other ones, and I'm growing a whole bunch, so I decided this year, I grew 10 last year. Of the 10, I saved one seeds from one plant, and then I put them into my actual, you know, I think there's about 30 plants, or probably a little more than the 30 plants out here. And I just wanted to be able to see whether or not now I can start narrowing in. I might find a bunch of different flavored tomatoes or shapes and colors. And to me, I don't have to be set on that one that I had found last year. I just got to find a good one. And then so if we'll come and look at the rest of them, because what you'll see is I only have one or just a couple of tomatoes that actually have these round ones. So if you actually look over here, say that. This is one that looks very similar to the original tomato that I saved from last year. What's interesting though is that if you looked at throughout the rest of the tomatoes, there aren't as many of those as there are like these beefsteak or lobed oblate type tomatoes. And it doesn't mean that I've failed in any particular way. It just means I have more to select from this year. Or I can decide that, hey, these fuzzy ones, even though they look great, they're not the ones that I want, so I can go ahead and cross those off and not save any seed from it. I'm basically going to make some selections this year that's going to push me into the next year. And hopefully I find several different varieties that have really great flavor, and that I can kind of go and branch off into those. But the thing is that if you look at all the rest of the tomatoes I have out here, you're going to have to get to a point where if you're following in and you've narrowed in on 5 or 4 different types of tomatoes, even if you're growing, you know, I think there's 140 tomatoes, 140 plus tomatoes out here. You're going to have to start saying that I can't grow anything out for you. I can't grow anything out for you. I'm trying to focus in on these, because it's going to take some time. It's going to probably take 6 to 8 years if I start narrowing in on these varieties, or 3 to 6 seasons. If you can, or I shouldn't say, yeah, it should be 6 to 8 seasons. But you could probably try to take it into 3 to 4 years. That if you can get 2 seasons in. I wouldn't suggest doing it unless you have 2 separate properties where you can, because I have a problem with starting your one season and then starting to get fruit from it. It's got disease on it, and then you have another season that's right next to it, or you have young plants that are right next to it. But you got to do what you got to do. But anyways, this is the tomato garden. This is an amateur approach. You know, again, also, as I have everything very close to each other, you have the ability for things to cross. I would say that I hadn't had anything crossed until last year. I had another variety of tomato that was a sun gold hybrid that was orange. I don't know what color it's going to be this year, but it's not a cherry type tomato anymore. It is more of a plum shaped tomato, or a plum shaped tomato with purple blush on it, which is not at all what I intended. But sometimes these happy little accidents happen, and who knows, it might be awesome flavor. I might have screwed it up, but I can go ahead and back and searching through everything again. You know, the fun thing about this is that you enjoy it, that you can experiment, and you don't have to have a specific goal too. You can just do it for the fun of it, just to see what else is out there, what else can you find, what else can you put together. So anyways, thank you all for coming out here, and I'll see you again.